Alright, for this tutorial I wanted to just take a quick look at event-driven architecture and how that relates to Flash and our ActionScript projects, and basically everything we're going to do in Flash is derived from this idea of events. And we want to take a look briefly as to what those are, how are they useful, some examples of them, and just kind of an overview, a 1,000-foot overview of what events are and how we're going to be using them, because they're basically in every aspect of our code. Okay, so what is an event? An event is an action. An event is, in its broadest terms, just something that happens. So an example of an event would be a mouse click. Somebody presses a button on the keyboard. Potentially you've got a service call to a backend API and it returns a value. That's an event that gets triggered. Maybe an animation is finished animating. That event is triggered. Maybe you have set a timer and a certain number of seconds have gone by. An event is triggered. And there's a host of other events, because it can be pretty much as broad or specific as you want to define it. It just is something that occurs. So then the notion of an event is it has its two parts. There's one object that is broadcasting an event, and there's another object that wants to hear an event, wants to know that an event has happened. And so these are called event. Broadcasting is called dispatching, and event handling or listening is just listeners. So you have dispatchers and you have listeners. And they actually, in ActionScript 3, you can see here in this hierarchy of classes, we're familiar with the sprite object, and that actually extends all the way back down to a basic object. But the first level of class that it extends upon is called event dispatcher. And that's important because that means that a sprite inherits all of the properties and methods of event dispatcher. And what is event dispatcher? The event dispatcher is the base class for all classes that dispatch events. So what it means is that if you want an object to declare an event has occurred, whether that be a key press, a mouse click, whatever, if something is going to happen, it has to extend event dispatcher. It has to be a class whose parent class is at some point up its inheritance hierarchy is an event dispatcher. The same goes for event listeners. If you want to be able to listen and hear events, you have to have extended event dispatcher at some point or another. The object that is listening for the event must extend event dispatcher. The object that is triggering or broadcasting the event must also extend event dispatcher. So it all comes back to this one class that all events revolve around, and then it gets more complicated from there. So why are events useful then? Events are useful in the context of our application because it allows us to capture user input. It allows us to set parameters. It allows us to do different and specific behavior based on what is occurring in the program. So to give probably the simplest example we can think of to just walk you through what an event would be is in our game Jumblets here we have a button on the screen that is an audio on-off button, and when you click it with your mouse it toggles the sound on or off. Okay, so we'll go into more deep depth about like the view stack and display list at a later date, but suffice to say right now that we have a movie clip on the stage that's this audio movie clip, this audio button. And what we want to do is we want to add a listener to it. Let's use this add event listener mechanism. Now, because this audio is a movie clip, which extends Sprite, which extends all the way back up Event Dispatcher, you can add and dispatch events from it. One of the events we can dispatch or listen to, well, we can't dispatch, but we can listen for is a mouse event. Mouse event has many different types of mouse-related events. The most common one is going to be click. So what this statement here is saying is I want to go to this audio button and I want to add a listener to it that says anytime a mouse click occurs on this display object, on this button, please call this function, this onToggle function. Okay, so that's now we're kind of getting the idea of what an event is and how it's used. So basically we're saying if something happens, do this. In this case, if a mouse click happens, toggle the sound. Run this function that says toggle the sound. And that's all that happens. So this function gets called every time a mouse is clicked on that button, and then it checks to see if the sound is on and it turns it off, and if it's off it turns it back on. Very simple, very straightforward. That's an example of using a mouse event and just clicking on a button. It's as simple and straightforward as it gets. So let's just go over briefly before we end then what our terminology is for events. So we have a dispatch event. That means broadcast the event. Listen is going to be capturing here the event. So the dispatcher is what's going to announce it. The listener is what's going to capture it. An event can be broadcast. The dispatcher doesn't care or know who's listening to it. It just basically is announcing to the world, hey, event XYZ has occurred. The listener then has to register, is the one that's responsible for registering to the objects that it thinks will dispatch events. So a listener has to go, let me get reference to this object, I'm going to add a listener to you, and anytime an event of this name, of this type occurs, let me know. And that event listener then has been registered, and now you have that linkage between a dispatch and a listener.